identifying and implementing anti-racist behaviours and processes in your everyday practice. No matter where you are on your anti-racist learning journey, this programme will help you move forward. Building racial literacy is for different types of educators, including early learning and childcare practitioners, community learning and development practitioners, as well as primary and secondary school teachers. Types of educators, including early learning and childcare practitioners,
Over 80 educators are learning together how to be anti-racist. They work in nurseries, early learning and childcare settings, primary and secondary schools, third sector organisation, local authorities and universities.
So according to that video, which was the initial video from Education Scotland, not only do they have at least one individual working in an early learning setting, they also have at least one individual working in a nursery setting, promoting anti-racism, or at the very bare minimum, approaching the class and treating the class in an anti-racist manner, adopting an anti-racist framework in order to see yourself through the day with the class. All right under the noses of Scottish parents, and all completely given the green light by our governments. By people that elect the SNP in particular, under this false premise that they're going to get a referendum, under this false premise that they're going to solve all their problems, under this false premise that they are the party for you. They're different to the rest of the parties across the UK. And of course the other parties across the UK, especially other parties across Scotland, we can't exactly say that they are in any way not complicit, because I don't hear them calling this out. Fundamentally, the fact that the government themselves have been given free rein to do as they please, as we know, or they're giving these individuals free rein to do as they please. They've got a plethora of numerous individuals from a multitude of different anti-racist organisations working on 4 separate fucking panels. We're all working together in tandem to create a critical race, theorised, anti-racist, equitable, socially just curriculum, academic curriculum, in order to eradicate the so-called racism that they insist is prevalent across society, if we take racism as they define it. Because they're redefining words, and this is going well past the point of just pointing to disparities, albeit they do that too. They're completely changing definitions, shifting the goalposts and pointing to Scotland as a whole, pointing to the structures, pointing to the system, means to not only dismantle it, to deconstruct it, but to advocate and push for it to be reconstructed in a manner that will prioritise and benefit them. And as I've said on a plethora of occasions before, one of the most fucking nefarious ideas that they've adopted and have been pushing for some time is proportional representation, which is not limited to BAMEs, admittedly, because the feminists do it too. But the reality of the matter is, when we're talking about foreign nationals, and I suppose I could probably include European people in this as well, it doesn't fucking matter. The reality of the matter is, we're talking about percentage points here. It doesn't fucking matter. The reality of the matter is, we're talking about percentage points here. And we're looking at the percentage of Scottish people within the Scottish population, the demographics. Last census 4%, therefore they're advocating for every position of power to have at least 4% BAME. So when the next census comes out and it showcases a drop from that initial 96% to say 90%, so 10% BAME, then that will change to 10% BAME for all these positions of power. Teachers, police chiefs, prosecutors, judges, head teachers, nurses, head of staff, whatever it may be. That's just one example. But fundamentally, we're talking about critical race theory here. We're talking about the fact that we have foreigners, not even people that were born here, that could make the irritable claim that they are just as Scottish as I am because they were born here. Right? We're talking about, in many instances, people that were not fucking born here, have moved to this country and have adopted this ideology and this frame of thinking, this worldview, because they know damn well that beneath the surface, when you scratch beneath the surface, there is an element of attacking the system in order to get what you want. It's an attempt to exploit the system, obtain power for yourselves. Graham Campbell alludes to it on a plethora of different occasions. They're all at it. Even when we talk about proportional representation, it's quite clear to see that a big part of the reason for why that is pushed so heavily is because there is a desire to seek power. And then when they get into these positions of power, they do nothing but benefit their own, advocate for their own, stand up for their own, and try their damnedest to ensure that not only can there never be a reduction or a reversal in the amount of BAMEs that they've managed to put into these positions, whether it be council, whether it be the government, they wish to see more. Try my damnedest not to lose the fucking head here, but I came across these two videos earlier on in the day, and it's this fucking boot. This fucking boot. You know, she's now doing the rounds again for the second round of this building racial literacy shite. And obviously the long-term plan is for the long-term goal at the end of all of this is for every teacher in time to be presented with this sort of framework, with this resources, this education, and it would just become part and parcel with their teacher training. So in time they'll all become anti-racist, critical race theorists. So they in turn will then promote that to their classes. And above all else as well, they also, in many occasions, Kajida Muhammad quite guilty of doing this, they actively encourage teachers to go out of their way to promote anti-racism, for an example. Not limited to, but that's not the point. Teachers have seemingly in today's society ditched what they were initially placed there for in the first place, which was to fucking teach, and instead promote nothing but activism and social justice talking points. But as far as I'm concerned, this is a line that's been crossed, that should never have been crossed. It's too fucking far. It's abhorrent as far as I'm concerned. It's shameful. The only thing that I can think of that is near enough on par with this in terms of fucking treachery is when they gave the ability for foreign nationals and refugees to not only stand in our elections but vote too. That was treachery of the highest degree. That was fucking an abhorrent act of government. This, on the other hand, I would argue is probably worse, because they're actively going after our youth. They're actively going after our fucking children.
Development practitioners, as well as primary and secondary school teachers. This program is also for educators in formal leadership positions, such as head teachers, middle leaders, and education officers in local authorities. We welcome educators at different stages of their anti-racist learning. So what does this program involve? Building racial literacy is delivered.
So what we got here? Creating safer, braver learning spaces. In the Building Racial Literacy program, we'll be working together as a community of practice with rich and varied experiences, knowledge and perspectives to ensure that our shared spaces in the program are inclusive and supportive of all program participants. There are some principles we all need to share and commit to as we build our racial literacy together. Acknowledging emotions, commit to self-care, embrace productive discomfort, capacity for growth and building relationships. Alright.
Online, and it takes place over several months. You will be given a safer, braver space to learn more about race, racism, and anti-racism.
Through the lens of these individuals. In fact, I'm going to play the video now.
And part of our social justice values, it eventually works. So don't give up on the term anti-racist. So yeah, just to give you a bit of background on what's going in Scotland, the Building Racial Literacy program is a professional learning program prototype that has been co-constructed with a range of anti-racist organisations, including the Scottish Association for Minority Ethnic Educators, so with Khadija here, and it's part of the wider Scottish Government programme of work looking at race, equality and anti-racism in education. And this first iteration of this prototype programme is really designed to build the racial literacy of educators across Scotland. And what we mean by racial literacy, we're really looking at developing people's understanding of racism. And just to touch on...
You mean redefining racism? I'll come on to the anti-racist educator in a moment, because the glossary within said website provides a plethora of different definitions which kind of put into perspective how this woman views the world, which kind of goes a long way in helping to provide an idea as to the sort of shit that building racial literacy, as well as the program itself, as well as the ideology, etc., kind of gives you an idea as to the sort of crap that's been sort of built upon, the framework, if you will. But fundamentally, she's going to come onto it, and it might just very well be after I resume it. She comes on to a point of sort of elaborating to a certain extent as to what she means by racism, and it's not what it fucking means. It's not what it means at all. And you know what I find kind of funny, actually, just on a separate note, is the fact that one of the narratives that these people peddle is that back in the day, white people just decided out of the blue to create the concept of race in order to justify going around the world, gallivanting around the world in their boats, to enslave everybody, treat them as subordinates, steal their resources, etc., right? So if we're expected to believe that we created the concept of race, that would then by default, or by extension, therefore then mean that racism, which would have come as a result of race, a concept that we created, that would mean that racism itself is technically a concept that we created. So how the fuck do they get to redefine it willy-nilly? Makes you fucking wonder. The big brains from the anti-racist community, they seem to have been able to just redefine history and pick and choose whatever sections of history they wish to point to in order to help to cement their viewpoints and their worldview.
Point about misconceptions about racism.
The misconceptions. Here's the arrogance coming out on full display, because this is what they all do. Because they've redefined society. They've gone to universities in many cases to do social studies and colonial studies, etc. And then they come out the other side of it so fucking thick as pig shit that they can't realise that everything that they then from that point onwards are espousing is shit they learnt in university. They had to go to university in order to come out the other side of it with the brain power and the knowledge and the know-how to be able to supposedly deconstruct society. They know all of a sudden, just like that, as you know, coming out the other side of university, they all of a sudden now know how to completely deconstruct society. They can point to every nook and cranny and show to you, or show to themselves anyway, convince themselves that that's built on racism, that's built on oppression, etc. They see the world so differently to the rest of us. And for some strange reason, they seem to have convinced themselves that that was because of the spectacular education that they had. Whereas, as I said, thick as fucking pig shit, because the reality of the matter is, it just showcases to me clear as day that they are nothing short of completely delusional, brainwashed, if you will. Either that, or they know damn well that they're peddling nonsense, which I would argue many of them are. Many of them are well aware that they're peddling nonsense, because irrespective of whether or not they're delusional and brainwashed as a result of an education course, or whether or not they're just going through the motions, with the intention or the end goal will still be the same if this goes unchecked.
That misconception that racism is really about individual hate and prejudice, and it's
that's exactly what the definition in the dictionary would showcase. So yeah, as I said, redefining words. You know, well, it's a misconception. What? Because you've come out of university and you're going to educate us all of a sudden with your building racial literacy program. You know what I can't stand about these fucking people is that they seem to think that the world owes them a living. Who the fuck are you, or anybody like you for that matter, to come to my country, my fucking country, and start creating a program fucking determined to working in tandem with the government? But let's just focus on the website in question first. A bunch of fucking self-entitled, arrogant, ignorant, racist, may I add, individuals who seem to have a bee in their bonnet, for lack of a better term, who seem to think that their ideology, if implemented, would create a better world for people like them at the expense of our youth. Who the fuck do you think you are? And as I pointed out many a year ago, these individuals were fringe once upon a time. Now all of a sudden, they're getting airtime all over the shop. They're getting promoted. Education Scotland gave her a cushy job. The government themselves have slapped them all into a bunch of panels, as if they're all of a sudden experts on quote-unquote racism. And as I said, I suppose they are when they get to define it and redefine it whenever they so choose. But think about it. It's like us going to one of their countries, their country of origin, and deciding to start creating programs and advocating for change. Everything needs to change. Everything's racist. Everything's discriminatory. Disparities are galore. You know? And then having the arrogance to assume that they're going to jump into a university, come out the other side of that conveyor belt, and have a better understanding of the society than the people that are the descendants of for many a generation. Fucking remarkable to me.
Intentional, and that wider systemic but also endemic nature.
There it is, systemic, endemic, just a buzzwords. It's a buzzword. So how do we solve this problem then? If racism is quote unquote systemic, what do we do then? Well, we need to start tackling the system, don't we? We need to start deconstructing. It's all about equity, isn't it? Because as I said, it's a malevolent power grab, irrespective of whether or not they so choose to admit that.
Racism is misunderstood.
It's misunderstood as well, you know. It's misunderstood because Specky here went to university. She's come out the other side of it and she can tell you wholeheartedly it's misunderstood, you know. Where's the proof of this? Oh, well, she's just an expert on all things anti-racist. And on top of that, she also knows how the society was built, what it was built upon. It's fucking remarkable. I genuinely think that historically, our ancestors, the evil white man, created a society that was just predicated on misogyny and oppression and racism, etc. Very complex, very fucking complex societies apparently, but only the big brain anti-racists, only they know how to solve the issues. Just listen to them, listen to the shit they espouse, and we can solve the problems. Racism's rife. Well, how do we fix that? Well, we could start by more BAMEs in Parliament. Oh, what a shit. I'll solve it. Well, I'll solve it all.
Not understanding that racism is not really an issue in Scotland, it's more an issue in England. Or
here we go. The video that I made regarding Uncle Ben, Mr. Rice, Uncle Ben, and I said, well, it's not the first time I've said it, but I said it in there as well, where there's always at least one reference from these BAMEs where they will say something to the effect of either Scotland, the nation itself, or the people within it, particularly the Scots, hold a belief that they are either above racism or racism's not really an issue here, etc., etc. Then gives them justification to go, well, here's where you're wrong. And then they insert their rebuttal, you know, but they're debunking a point that nobody made. I also said in that video as well that you could make the argument that maybe, just fucking maybe, there was a sort of subtle agreement, gentleman's agreement, if you will, that racism wasn't really much of an issue here in terms of it not being thought of nor spoke of all that often because we were a relatively homogenous country. Therefore, there was no need to talk about it. Hence why I grew up without ever considering race once up in the Highlands. Now all of a sudden it's all I ever fucking hear. That's all I ever hear. And it's never through a beneficial lens. It's through whining, it's through complaining, it's through moaning, and it's through malevolent shit like this.
The US, but not really in Scotland. So in this program, we're really trying to raise people's awareness of how racism works in Scotland, uplifting, amplifying those experiences of racism in Scottish education so that educators become aware of how it can operate, even within their classrooms, often unintentionally, because they're unaware.
Unintentionally. I mean, have you ever heard such fucking nonsense? I mean, this woman herself went to America. I can't recall off the top of my head if it was to kind of get work experience, so to speak, or just learn a bit more about critical race theory, or if it was for part of her course, whatever it was. When she came back to the UK, she was somewhat perplexed that there wasn't very much in the way of reading materials regarding anti-racism. She didn't understand it, because it's a fucking American phenomenon. Coming from the same woman who created intersectionality, or the term anyway. Point is though, she was somewhat stumped, and then she did manage to find some materials or some so-called experts in the field such as Akala, etc., but it was mainly English centric. That wasn't good enough. She wanted to come here and promote this cancer, and it's the way that she seems to be somewhat chuffed by that fact that now we're learning, now we're promoting our cancer to teachers, educators in Scotland, showing them that they're just as racist as America, and even happens in their classroom, whether or not they realise that, we're talking about the microaggressions, are we? Oh yeah, the rife microaggressions. I mean, they say that with a straight face. They should be embarrassed. They should be fucking embarrassed.
So it's about building their understanding, also building their confidence to practice, embed anti-racist practice in their behaviours and processes, and build their confidence in racial dialogue. So really building their skills to talk about race with racial dialogue. So really building their skills to talk about race with children, with young people, with with staff, colleagues.
And why would they need to talk to children about race? Again, harkening back to my comment about living in the Highlands. Never had to be spoken to about race. Race was never an issue. Race was never a conversation. Race was something I never thought of whatsoever. I just considered myself Scottish. And that was it. My whole class was Scottish. Everybody was Scottish. And fundamentally, for the most part, the place I live is still Scottish, by and large. Or is that something else that he's deconstructed to? Oh, so white Scottish. Sorry, I better be inclusive. Don't want to be offending. Don't want to generate those microaggressions. I know. But why would they need to talk to children about race? Or anybody, for that matter. This is something that Kajida Muhammad does as well. I don't think I've clipped it, but I know what videos it is to clip if I need to. Where she was making complaints that some teachers were unsure of whether or not they could truly be themselves. BAME teachers, that is. The system kind of made them feel that they couldn't be themselves. Now, when she elaborated a little bit further, what she actually meant by that was that they couldn't start promoting anti-racist shit. They didn't feel comfortable. And that needed to change. So by and large, Kajida Muhammad, fucking googly eye, is encouraging BAME teachers to go into these teaching roles, but not so they can solely be teachers and, help bump up the percentage point a little bit, as it's underwhelming and shocking and racist and whatnot because there isn't 4% teachers that are BAME. But they don't just want any old teacher that's BAME. They want BAME teachers to go into these positions that will happily promote the anti-racist ideology. And as I said, anti-racism is the doorway into critical race theory, and this fucking bitch is one of the people that's helping to perpetuate it.
Parents and wider communities, because that is such an important skill if we want a fair society for all.
For all, as if we don't have a fair society for all. No, it's equity that you people are after.
And so as part of this prototype program, we wanted to have a range of different perspectives included in the first cohort. So we've had nominations through 27 different Scottish local authorities, so all the way from the Central Belt, down to the Central Belt, and all the way up to Orkney as well. So really diverse perspectives.
Diverse perspectives, my arse.
With a 2-part induction over 2 days, where you will be introduced to key concepts, skills and language that will help you make sense of your...
Look at this. Look at this. Ease the squeeze, eh? Independence. Independence is looming. Some of these fannies on Twitter and whatnot, they genuinely are still of the belief that they're Scottish nationalists. They kind of own the label when they get castigated for being a nationalist. If you're a fucking Scottish nationalist and you fucking accept this, you voted for the SNP and you're fine with that, you ain't no nationalist. You're a disgrace. You're a fundamental disgrace. Because do not be fooled by the term anti-racist. We are so far beyond that point. Critical race theory right under your nose. Directed specifically at your children if you've got any. Your little brother or sister if you've got one of age. Your cousins. Your nieces, your nephews, your friends' kids. Just Scottish children in general. Or does none of that matter because shitty, thin-lipped fucking Sturgeon and the anti-racist brigade promise you independence and that's fine. Anything's got to be better than the Tories, right? Where the fuck do you draw the line, man?
Unique anti-racist learning journey. To support your learning, you will be asked to keep a reflective journal. On the programme, you will find a diverse network of educators in Scotland on similar anti-racist learning journeys to support, challenge and inspire you along the way. After the induction, you will be invited to Twilight webinars, and you will be required to complete a series of online self-directed tasks between programme events. The final task involves the creation of an anti-racist action plan that will help you implement anti-racism in your own setting. while centering the interests of children, young people, learners, and all those who experience racism.
Not centering children. And of course, who experiences racism? Well, we all know, do we not? That the way that these people view the world, white people can't be the victims of racism. And by and large, this very ideology attacks the concept of white. Therefore, it's by extension specifically targeting your children, as I said. So, there was a bit at the top, if I remember rightly. Oh yeah, look. References. White racial identity development model. Talking about white privilege. Showing solidarity and deeper understanding towards other marginalised groups than my own, for both learners and their families and colleagues. Will help to build my skills and knowledge when supporting pupils and colleagues. Will help to design a curriculum that is more representative and meaningful. Of course, it's all about that representation. That'll solve problems. Oops, sorry. What else have we got here? Having teachers who are racially literate, means that learners are able to enjoy a curriculum that is more meaningful and representative of an Agenda 21 / 21st century Scotland, and more global. It's all about eradicating the concept of nation, state, national pride, a nation in general, the people that make up the nation, racial makeup, demographic, national sovereignty, borders, what makes you you, in favour of global citizenship, multiculturalism, diversity, you name it, it's there. And it's anti-racist and progressive. This will encourage learners to have more open conversations with their teachers as they begin to feel more accepted and valued in their educational spaces, because apparently the implication being that they don't feel valued. Why? Because they're black or brown living in a white society. So that needs to change. Fundamentally, one of two things needs to occur for that to change. One, whites go, or two, the system changes to benefit them, which by default would then come at a detriment to the whites. Because if the implication is at present that it benefits whites and puts them at a disadvantage, in order to flip the switch, so to speak, you immediately just reverse the roles. For all learners, it will increase their tolerance and respect for those from different backgrounds, because that's what it's about. It's about helping to normalise multiculturalism and mass migration to our children, because you are preparing them for a future that none of us voted for. Agenda 2030, learning for sustainability, global citizenship, anti-racism, social justice, equity, climate crisis, climate justice, well-being economies. Nobody fucking voted for any of this nonsense, but yet you're forcing it upon us anyway and brainwashing our children to accept it. And it's fucking disgusting. It's fucking vulgar. Critical thinking, my arse. There was not one critical thought that ever left the brain of that BAME that I just had on the screen a minute ago. As I said, thick as pig shit, or deliberately malevolent. I don't know. Children and young people will feel better prepared to dismantle the unfairness they see in the world and begin to be the agents of change. So this is literally no different at this point to the sustainability shit, where they're preparing them to become political activists. How's that any different? So how are they going to view the world through the manner where they see things that are unjust and unfair in order for them to then become the agents of change? We're going to have to promote things to them in a certain manner. And we can't trust them to really realistically teach them what's right and what's wrong, what's fair and what's not, when they're looking at the world through such a warped lens as it is. I heavily advocate for everybody to be homeschooling their child at this point, really. Even if you're not financially in a position to do so, even if you really don't feel that you would be able to do what's required, I genuinely would make the argument, and I know this is going to sound a bit stupid, but I would make the argument that a thick child who has not got any grades, no exams or anything, is far better off than a child that's going to be subjected to this shit day in, day out, Day in, day out. Wow. Reading research and articles written by minority groups to understand their perspective, which may be different to my own. Why? Because they're BAME. Oh, wow. With racial literacy comes the tools and vocabulary to discuss more complex ideas about race and a growing understanding of how racism operates in its multiple forms. It's multiple fucking forms. I mean, they're taking the piss. Even if the concept in and of itself existed, as it was once upon a time described in dictionaries, it more or less sounds no different to tribalism, inherent tribalism, and a preference to prefer your own. But these people have taken it and they've morphed it and manifested it into something that seems to change as society progresses, as the decades go by. It's retarded, man. Taking all these multiple different forms. You know. Overt, invert, microaggressive, subtle, to name a few. Racial illiteracy is very common in the West, where people are taught from a young age that everybody is equal and that race does not matter. And if everybody adopts a colourblind lens to stop seeing race in brackets, then racism will disappear. Racial illiteracy is hugely problematic as we begin to realise the disastrous impacts of implicit, unintentional racism. Unintentional racism. And institutional racism. Propagated by the state and those with power. Oh yeah. And when they refer to power, they're referring to the whites because they're the majority and they make up the majority of positions of power within the country. Because again, this is about power to them. And for some strange reason, they see the world through the lens of, because the parliament, for example, is majority white, whites are in power. So in order to sort of level that playing field, they need BAMEs in there. So the BAMEs will be in power, but the difference is, again, either thick as pig shit or they know damn well what they're doing. The implication is that the whites in parliament represent and they benefit all whites across society, irrespective of political differences and whatnot. Therefore, it stands to reason that when we level the playing field, we need to have BAMEs in there that will do the same. Problem with that is, the whites in parliament don't represent fucking anybody, but bar the wankers, the idiots, the morons that vote for them. Oh, I'm the new Scot. Racial literacy involves adopting a more nuanced understanding of race, taking time to develop it, and it is a lifelong project. Learning more about structural racism doesn't exist. Critical race theory, of course, and white fragility are great places to start. White fragility. The irony, of course, being that all we ever hear about is the poor plight of the BAMEs, and that's why everything in society needs to change. Doesn't sound like it's the whites that are very fragile, do you? What else have we got? Well, race, obviously, racism, privilege. Let's have a wee look at, critical race theory, I suppose, is pretty relevant at this point in time. It's a framework developed in the US, of course, and is used increasingly in the UK by people like this to expose so-called racial power structures that don't fucking exist. They only exist through the framework of critical race theory. Isn't it wonderful? As I said, thick as pig shit. Critical race theory places racism at the heart of its framework so that racism is no longer considered to be an unusual occurrence created by evil people with cruel intentions. It considers racism to be normal, endemic, and an ingrained feature of Western society, therefore giving you the justification to dismantle it. As I said, I'm not going to go too much further because I'm noticing the length of time. But I can just get to, just to showcase who this is, obviously. There she is, Melina. Again, individuals who are behind this, and it's only going to get fucking worse. It's fucking, I don't know. I think it's abhorrent. Absolutely fucking abhorrent. Look at all this, man.